Hello everyone and welcome to Uncharted Parenting, a podcast brought to you by Encounter Youth. Parenting is one wild adventure. It's full of twists, turns and plenty of uncharted territory. Don't worry, you're not navigating it alone, we're here with you. Each episode here on the pod, we dive into real conversations, expert insights from some amazing professionals from various fields, and honest stories to help you find your way in this parenting journey. I'm your host, Louis, the Education and Parent Coordinator at Encounter Youth. Before joining the team here, I enjoyed 9 years serving as a police officer in the South Australian Police. But most importantly, I'm the proud dad of 2 boys. Welcome to Uncharted Parenting because, let's be honest, no one really has a map for this journey. Let's dive in. So welcome to another episode of Uncharted Parenting. We've had the opportunity here at Uncharted Parenting to bring to our audience some incredibly insightful interviews and with some amazing professionals across Australia, but we have now officially gone international and we are excited to be speaking with parenting educator, author and internationally recognised speaker and also mum of 2 boys, most importantly, Dr Vanessa Lapointe. So Vanessa, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
It's my pleasure.
I've been really excited, really looking forward to our chat today. We've had it planned for a long time, so it's great to finally speak with you. And before we jump into all things parenting and what we're going to speak about today, I'd love for our listeners over here in Australia, if they haven't heard of you, to get to know who you are and what your journey has been to sort of get to the point that you're at now, to be this author, internationally recognised speaker and parenting educator. So do you mind sharing with us and our listeners a little bit about your journey?
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. Well, I started out I worked with kids all the time when I was a teenager. I always had summer jobs where I was, at summer camps and all of those kinds of things. And when I went up to university, I was very clear on the fact that I wanted to continue to work with kids. I trained then as a psychologist, started practicing, and realized about 5 years into my career that working with kids was probably not going to be the long-term plan. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason for that is that I had since become a mother myself and had started to realize, much to my horror, that a lot of my formal training was really useless when it came to my own children. In the best way, not only was it useless, but I also couldn't make sense of it. Like, it felt wrong to me. The things that I had been taught and coached to do and say and be for children were very much at odds with what it felt in my heart was the right thing as a mother. Mm. And so I retrained. I became sort of the master of my own journey and sought out people that I wanted to learn from, that I wanted to train with, that I wanted to intern with in order to onboard a much broader and I would say more developmentally centered understanding of who children are. And with all of that came to the realization that I should not be working with children, that if I really wanted to make the world a better place for our children, give children all of the opportunities that they need in order to grow as nature intended, that who I needed to work with were the people who were actually creating the environment and the world around the child. A 5-year-old child, even a 15-year-old child, they have really very little agency in deciding what their world looks like and feels like. They are counting on their grown-ups, their parents, their teachers, their other big people, as I call them, to do that and do that well. And so I really began a shift, a transition towards working with parents. I started speaking a lot. I started writing, and one thing led to the next, and here we are.
Wonderful. Well, I'm very grateful that you made that switch, and you're getting to speak to us today. So you're doing some amazing work. I actually saw a little bit of what you did on Scene, the documentary, yes. And that was a wonderful. And speaking about the world around our young people, that was really about that, and it really sort of focuses in on parents, doesn't it? And sort of parents on their journey. So I'm really grateful for you and for the work that you do. And I'm really excited about our chat today. So thank you for sharing with us a little bit about your journey. It looks a bit sunny where you are. So whereabouts are you based, Vanessa?
So I'm on the west coast of Canada, just outside Vancouver, BC.
Beautiful. It looks a lot sunnier there than what it is here in gloomy old Adelaide at the moment in South Australia. So, yes, it looks beautiful. I definitely need a bit of that sunshine soon, I think.
Well, come December, she will be on the other foot. I'll be yearning for the sunshine in Adelaide while it's pouring rain here in Vancouver.
Very true. Very true. Well, Vanessa, we are going to focus today on boundaries and the topic of boundaries. But I think as parents, as a parent myself to two boys, and you're a parent to two boys as well, even from a young age, setting boundaries can be challenging. And especially as our young people get a little bit older, they tend to push back a little bit more, don't they? And I think it's important we set the scene here. So what do we actually mean when we talk about boundaries in parenting, especially with teenagers? And I know you've gone through this. You've got a couple of teenagers now yourself, I imagine.
Well, they're 18 and 21 now.
Yeah. Okay. So they're past the teenage years now. So, but you've been through the thick of it. So, yeah, what do we actually mean, Vanessa, when we're talking about boundaries in parenting?
Yeah. It's such a great question. And it's becoming very sort of buzzy, in the child raising world, that everybody wants to talk about boundaries and what that is and what it's not. And I think part of talking about what boundaries are is also talking about what boundaries are not. Yeah. When I think about a boundary, I think about the role of the parent in creating an experience for their child to grow in so that the child gets to be everything that nature intended for them. And so a boundary then is, how do I facilitate within the child the experience of what I'll label as adaptation? How do I allow the child to know that they have hit a wall, that there is a rule, that there is a norm, maybe it's a standard, maybe it's an expectation, whatever it is, that they've run into that wall, that boundary, and that there needs to be some sort of adaptation that happens so that the child is able to onboard what the boundary is about. And eventually, over time, we don't expect it to happen right away, internalize that lesson or internalize that norm, that standard, that expectation, that rule. So that's a little bit about what boundaries are. What boundaries are not is an excuse for adults to transgress on the well-being of a child in the name of parenting or in the name of good behavior or in the name of respect. Boundaries are not about grown-ups getting to be just like in charge and kids having to just acquiesce. Boundaries are not about, when you're a very little child, we know that because of brain development and other kinds of things, you're not really in a position to make certain decisions about your body, about your safety, whatever else. And so boundaries, so many times these days I hear like parents will say to their children, it's time to go to bed. And the child will say, my body, my choice. Because they've been, coached along the way, all these things. Well, you're 3. Yeah. And sleep is really important. It's good for our bodies. It's good for our brains. And so we're not actually having a discussion about that.
Yeah.
Don't get to decide. Yeah. So boundaries are not about imposing our will on top of children. Boundaries are about shoring children up so that they are able to confidently walk on this journey of life and know a little bit what the map looks like and feels like.
Yeah, that's really great. I like what you said about not imposing on their will. And it is, I think if we go let's say 10 years ago, I think boundaries, if we were discussing boundaries, it would have looked a lot different, and it might have even come across a little bit more like, adults are a bit imposing and, whatever I say goes with the child. But is there a reason, Vanessa, that boundaries are really important, especially during those adolescent years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think boundaries, just as part of being human, if you think about like what it is to drive across a bridge and that there are guardrails on those bridges, and we drive across the bridge and we feel safe driving across the bridge because there are guardrails on the bridge. Yep. If you came up on a bridge later today on your commute home and somebody had taken the guardrails off the bridge, would you drive across the bridge?
You'd have to think twice. Yeah, you'd definitely think twice, wouldn't you? Yeah.
You would definitely think twice. There might be some people who would still drive across the bridge, but they have to admit that they're driving in the center lane and they're probably driving a little bit more slowly, and they're very alert to the fact that there's no guardrails. But the truth of the matter is, if you were to ask, 99% of the population, have they ever bumped into a guardrail on a bridge? Most people are going to say, no, I've never bumped into a guardrail on a bridge. And then my follow-up question would be, okay, well, why do you need them? You need them because they provide the experience of containment. And containment is what allows for us to feel safe. It allows for us to feel cared for. It allows for us to feel kind of honored in our integrity as human beings, like our life is worth something, we're valued. And so now think about your teenagers. And as they're coming through that adolescent period, and they've got, one hand reaching forward into the independence of adulthood, but they also have another hand, like tenderly reaching backwards, remembering the safety and the cocoon that was their childhood. It is a topsy-turvy, wobbly time at best for most of our adolescents as they come through all of the ins and outs of what it is to grow and mature into an adult. Now, imagine that you do that every day, having to drive on a bridge that has no guardrails. That which was wobbly and topsy-turvy now becomes terrifying and impassable. Like you can't do it because it's too overwhelming. And if that happens, then the challenge that we face is one of two directions. Either the child will go, and lock down, which means effectively their development gets stifled because they are frozen in fear, or they will go the opposite, where they will become numb to it because it's too much. And so they become numb, and then all bets are off.
Yeah.
And we see these kind of outlandish behaviors and them looking like they're not really paying a lot of attention to safety and well-being and those kinds of things because they literally aren't seeing it. They've put blinders on so that they don't have to be reminded that the bridge has no railings on it, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Right? So either way, it's not good. What our adolescents really want is they want the guardrails on the bridge so that they can feel safe as they, take on this quest to become whoever it is that they are meant to become. And that they get to have, there's a little bit of room made for them, that they get to be part of the conversation. They get to be part of the decisions and the discussion around those decisions, but that it's not on them to make sure the guardrails are functioning. Yeah.
That's a fantastic analogy. I've not heard that before about the bridge and the guardrails. Yeah, it's a fantastic analogy. And when you're right, you're 100% right. When you sort of take the guardrails away, you can see how it could go one of two ways, can't it? And I think that probably leads me nicely into the next question I have for you, Vanessa, is pushback. And teenagers, adolescents, if you and I were to sit down and discuss some behaviors that maybe a teenager is likely to go through in those years, we'd probably say, they're probably going to push back against rules or guidelines or, those boundaries that we are setting. And we know that this is further exacerbated during that time. But how, as parents, when we're introducing these boundaries, how can we reinforce them in a way that doesn't impose on their will, like we've discussed? Is there something typically going on beneath that resistance for a teenager?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about the resistance first, and then we can talk about, how not to be so imposing when we're working alongside our teens to figure out how to navigate. So the resistance that our teens come forward with is actually a really essential part of their development. When we talk about growing, we can land on this concept of individuation, which essentially is becoming one's own person. And so when a human baby is born, they actually don't realize they're separate to their parent. They don't really piece that together until somewhere around 24 months of age, where they come into this understanding, oh, wait a second, you mean like I have my own mind? I get to decide. And then we see what people horrifically call the terrible twos. I like to call them the terrific twos, but that's the me do self stage, where they want to be their own person. So that's the first step towards becoming yourself. And then eventually, I am my parent becomes I am my parent, and myself becomes I am myself influenced by my parent. And then the final stage is I am myself. And so when you're a teen, you're coming into the I am myself, like I'm my own person, influenced by my parent.
Mm-hmm.
To become one's own person isn't always a really natural process. And so it requires the teen to be stepping away from their parent and creating a little bit of space around themselves in order to hear their own voice, in order to understand their own thoughts, their own opinions, their own minds. Like they have to separate a little bit to create some space so they can do all of those things. That stepping away is hard. It provokes fear, and there's this internal unease that most of us have when we're feeling separated from the people that we love. And so since the step away is hard to do for a lot of our teens, that step away becomes a push. They push away. And now all of a sudden, you say the sky is blue, and they will argue till their death that it is green. You say death metal is, evil. And they say death metal's an art form. Like everything's going to be at
everything's
odds.
Everything's a battle. Everything's an argument. Yeah.
Everything. And I use death metal only because I had to listen to that for about 3 years. Thank God we've moved through that stage. And I never did say that it was evil. I would say I didn't really love it, but I could appreciate the artistry and the incredible talent that people have to create those sounds coming out their mouth. So because the step away is hard, then sometimes that step away becomes a push away. So that's kind of where, we get this, it's so hard being the parent of a teenager because they're stepping away, and invariably that becomes triggering to us. And so this is the next layer. The next layer is that we take that personally when we really ought not to. It's not personal. It's just adolescence, right? But we take it personally. We think they're being disrespectful. We think they're being offensive. We think they're being rude. We think they're being calculating. We think they're being dismissive, whatever words we're coming up with. And then we react to that by trying to tighten things down instead of getting curious about what's up for our teen, also getting curious about what's up for us, and coming alongside all of that from a developmentally friendly understanding, knowing that it is our job to allow our teens this space. It is our job to respect them and honor them for the journey that they're on, for the age and stage that they are at, while still ensuring that the guardrails are securely fastened to the bridge. And we do that in a way that doesn't raise so much resistance in our teens by bringing it back to relationship. My boys are 18 and 21 now. I've never grounded them. I've never had to threaten that I'm taking their phones away or taking their car keys away or any of those kinds of things. They, by and large, do my bidding, do what it is that I ask of them because they like me.
Yeah.
They want to.
Yeah. And I guess that relationship that you have with them is key in that. And, we probably often hear that word, don't we, connection, and having that connection with them and seeing them for who they are as individuals. I think as parents, you're 100% right on what you said. We can often take it personally, especially during those years. I think about back to my teenage years, and I certainly wouldn't have been easy to get alongside and listen to all the time as well. And that pushback was definitely a thing that I did in those years. And I think that as well, parents maybe. Is there a best practice approach that parents can adopt maybe that doesn't, because often when there is this pushback, like you said, we can react and then it escalates into a conflict and then what do we do from there? So how do we set these boundaries firmly, clearly, and with relationship at the forefront of that, like you said?
Yeah. You know, like how long do we have? 8 hours?
Yeah.
I
I'd love
think
to pick your brain. I'd love to pick your brain for 8 hours, even about my own parenting. That would be fantastic. But I'm mindful of your time as well.
I'll give you the condensed answer, and we can do the 8 hour version another time. The trick is two things. First off, to understand that when you become reactive to your teen, it has nothing to do with your teen. And I know that you could probably give me a list a mile long, all of the reasons why actually it is your teen that's made you fill in the blank, angry, frustrated, disrespected, whatever it is. But your teen had nothing to do with that, because I could have a lineup of 10 other parents standing right behind you watching the same scene unfold. And each one of those 10 other parents is going to have a different feeling and a different response to that exact same scenario unfolding. And so your reaction to however it is that your teen is showing up, especially if your teen is pushing back, your reaction is yours to own. Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is your power to choose, and in that choice lies your freedom. You get to decide. Your teen is being a disrespectful little asshole. Are we allowed to swear? I just did.
That's totally fine.
Or your teen is being an emergent young person who's becoming themselves. Think about how different you feel internally when you choose belief A or belief B. With belief B, my teen's becoming who they're meant to be. Okay. Now I'm not at the effect of it. Now I'm like, okay, we're going to work with this. And no, you can't drive 6 hours away on a road trip on the first weekend that you got your driver's license. Might be a true story. Because that's not what we're doing.
Yeah.
So we're going to figure it out, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to get curious about it, and we're going to see if there's any solutions that are reasonable within the problem, and then we're going to find our way forward from there. So the first thing is, if you're triggered, own it. There's nothing more empowering than owning that, because when you can sit with those parts of yourself, which, by the way, are probably the parts of yourself that when you were a teenager, got in trouble or got big blowback because of how you were showing up. That's the part now that's like, rah, you will not speak to me that way. It's not your grown-up self saying those things. Your grown-up self is way wiser than that. But your adolescent self, who still is alive inside of you, might be saying those things and be really upset about those things. Right? And so it's your adolescent self that has become triggered. It's not your grown-up self. So be empowered in that. Understand that if we want to grow our children, we really do have to spend the time to grow ourselves. So we're showing up as parents in our adult form, not in child versions of ourselves. Because kids, as it turns out, don't do a terribly great job of raising other kids. Yeah?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. And then second to that, if we don't want to have big pushback, we bring it back to the relationship, and we make sure always that we connect before we direct. And so when we're wanting it to go a certain way, when we want there to be a certain thing happening, when we want a certain boundary to be respected, we understand that when connection is high, resistance will be low. But the opposite is also true. When connection is low, resistance will be high. And so rather than grinding away at trying to get your teen to submit to whatever rule, I would say retreat right back. And where you're retreating to is the foundational context of the relationship. Does your teen like you? And if they don't like you, then get to work. It is your job to shore up that relationship so they have somewhere soft to lean into, and then they'll be so much more willing to do your bidding without the war.
Yeah. I think there's some really practical insight there, Vanessa. So, thank you for that. I really love that phrase that you just said, connect before you direct. That really simple phrase, but it's so powerful, I think. And then also the just a really simple example you just gave about resistance and connection. So if connection is low, resistance is going to be high. So really practical examples. I love those. I would probably, even though I'm not parenting teenagers right now, I probably would go back to that and try and remember that.
I found it works with husbands. It works with friends. Like part of the human condition is that we are wired to resist the influence of people that we do not feel connected to. Because if you think about that from an evolutionary perspective, we are not meant to do the bidding of people that we can't trust or that we don't know are part of the inner circle and thus have our best interests at heart. And so we are biologically wired. It's called counterwill. We're biologically wired to do the opposite of what is being asked of us if we feel out of connection with that person.
That's incredible. And our bodies are an amazing thing. That's ingrained into our biology. We're probably, like I said, we don't have 8 hours to go into this stuff today. But I think as well, Vanessa, parents often, feel guilty about things or doubt themselves, especially when trying to enforce those boundaries that we've talked about today. Often that can turn into tears or like anger and conflict. Is there a way that we can maybe sit with that and not second guess ourselves when we're doing that? I think as parents we do that. I think it's a natural thing as a parent. I mean, I do that now already. Second guess decisions that you make or things that are said, and then you have to backtrack. So, is there a way that we can sit with that as parents?
Yeah, and my response to that would be to think about, rather than trying to figure it out, figure it in. And so when you are feeling guilty or feeling upset about something in terms of a boundary that you've laid down for your child, you've got to really go to the core of why. And the why is actually going to have nothing to do with the situation immediately in front of you that you just laid the boundary down for your child. The situation is going to have something to do with a program that you are running underneath the surface. For example, if as a child yourself, you were taught that you need to do what your elders ask of you. So if your parent or a teacher or somebody says, do this, then whether or not that feels right to you and whether or not that feels good to you, you were taught you have to do that or there'll be hell to pay. What you then learn is that in order to secure love and affection, you must be compliant. You need to follow the rules, or usually what happened, I'm 50 years old, so I'm older than you. When in my day, if I didn't follow the rules, I got a wooden spoon on my bottom. That's just how they did it. And so I learned real early that I work to please everyone around me because that's what secures me belonging. That's what secures me love. That's what secures me approval, all of those kinds of things. So we are trained from very young to do all of that. Then we grow up, at least in form, and we have children and they become adolescents and they're pushing back and they want it done a certain way. And we say no. And then all of a sudden we can feel like the shockwave of guilt going through our body that we just made our child so disappointed or whatever it is. And if you really felt like your no was your truth, then isn't it interesting that we go to guilt? Where does the guilt come from? It has nothing to do with your kid. It has everything to do with the program. I live to please others. And that's how I secure my belonging. That's how I secure my approval and all those other kinds of things. And so essentially, our guilt comes from a program of codependence that we onboarded when we were children. Most of us as children are very well trained to be codependent people pleasers. And so we have teens and they're pushing back and we're like, like we don't know how to handle ourselves around it because we have long held the belief. We don't even know it. It's a belief that lives in the cells of our body, not in our rational mind. But we have this belief that we're meant to just keep everybody happy. And then when we feel guilty, guilt that gets held onto will always be expressed as anger. And so if we sit in our guilt, some of us wallow in guilt and become delicate little wallflowers and amebically like, ooh, the boundary gives way and we're just like, here, have it all. Others of us will onboard our guilt, and then we will bring that guilt down on our children in the form of anger, where we will become reactive and all the other things. But again, it has nothing to do with our child and everything to do with the fact that we believe we should deliver on these things, and now we're not delivering on those things, and that we've internalized it, and that's our problem to sort out.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. It goes to show how your own upbringing really affects the way you parent, and the imprints that were imparted on you during your own adolescent years are the ones that normally come out, and those are the reactive things that sort of come out during those difficult moments. And for those that haven't watched the movie, seen the documentary, that was all really about that. I'd definitely recommend going and watching that. It's all about your own imprints and things like that, and how that affects you as a parent. But
those imprints become your blueprints, right?
Blueprints. That's the word. That's the word that I'm looking for. Thank you. So with the long game in mind, Vanessa, what encouragement could you perhaps give to some of our parent listeners who maybe feel that connection that we've spoken about today, that maybe it's slipping away a little bit, and how can we get that back?
Mm-hmm. It really is about just taking a beat and slowing life down and being very present to what it is that's happening around you. When we think about establishing connection or healing, when there's been a little bit of a rupture in connection, what you really want to think about is those sort of age-old social psychology rules, things like birds of a feather flock together, two peas in a pod, we tend to like people who like us, that kind of stuff. And so you can use that to your advantage as a parent if you're trying to get back on the right track. If you've realized, what, I've been a little reactive, or I've been a little loosey-goosey with the boundaries, and so the guardrails aren't firmly on the bridge, or whatever it is, go back to those basic principles of relationship. When people feel like we like them, they tend to like us back. How are you showing your teen that you like them, that you think they're cool, that you think they're interesting, that you think they have a fabulous mind, that you think their newfound sense of fashion is really interesting, like whatever it is? How do you communicate that to them? Not in like big neon lights, but in the drip drop, drip drop, drip drop. That is your day-to-day life. How does it register on your face? How does it come out your mouth with words? How is it communicated through your body language that you think they're cool and they're interesting? You like them. You want to be around them. So when people feel like we like them, they tend to like us back. So start there. You can also go to birds of a feather flock together. What is it that your teen is really into right now? And even if there is not a single part of you that is down with that interest, enter the era of death metal.
Yeah, I was just about to say, is it death metal? And use that as an example. Yeah, that's a great one.
That you become interested in it in a way that's authentic and in a way that's resonant to your truth. I didn't come out of the gates, rah, death metal from my kid. I said to him, I don't know that it's really my jam. And these guys are talented. Tell me how he does that sound. Tell me what's happening. We had all these crazy discussions about how these very not human sounds can come out of somebody's mouth, and how they train, and where the points of injury often happen on their vocal cords, and why, and what they do. We had endless conversations about all of those kinds of things. I don't give a shizzle about death metal, but all right, I really care about my kid. And by extension, I really care about what he cares about. And I get interested in that. I make it a point to be available to those discussions. And then the last thing I would say is that it's really easy when our kids, they've got beards and they're driving cars, and they might have significant others, and they're getting jobs, and they're, my boys, they both probably have a solid 100 pounds on me, and they're well over 6 feet tall. They're huge.
Yeah.
We look at our children when they're in that stage of life and we're like,
Yeah.
they got it. Whew, I'm out.
Yep.
But the truth is, they don't. Your teens are not adults. Your teens are still trying to find their way. And so when you're a parent of a teen, you don't get to retire. They're not ready. They might look like they're ready. They might look like, because they're walking around in their kind of young adult bodies and doing all of these adult things, that they're ready. They're not ready. You need to continue to show up for work. And what I tell all of my clients and endeavor to live out in my own life, even at 18 and 21 for my boys, is you've got to show up for work every day, even if you're not put to work. So, unless I'm out at dinner, at a speaking event or whatever, on a regular evening around my house, you will find me either in the kitchen or in the living room that is immediately attached to the kitchen. Why? Because I have 18 and 21-year-old boys. All they do is eat. I am guaranteed they're going to show up in the kitchen. And if I'm around on the edges of that, 8 days out of 10, we're not having a big, long chat about anything interesting. We're not having, big exploratory discussions about the meaning of life. But on those other 2 days, we are.
Yeah.
And I don't know when that day's coming. So I just keep showing up for work. And what happens is, on the other side of that, the relationship is intact. And so when the rubber hits the road, and life gets tough, or something happens, one of them gets into trouble at school, or somebody crashes their car, or whatever it is, that we are solid and we are tight, and they come to me and they know that I'm going to deliver on whatever is needed because we have a history of showing up for each other.
That's really beautiful. I had this picture in my head of you going into the kitchen or the living room every single day and just being like, maybe it's a hello or a grunt here and there. Were they getting something from the fridge or from the pantry or whatever that with their
headphones on? Yeah, well, they're listening to whatever. But
you constantly being there and being that presence for them, knowing that you're still there, knowing that you're that presence for them, so important. And I often think as well, even in my own parenting journey, I sometimes look at my eldest, he'll be 4 next week, and I look at him and I go, sometimes I feel like he can do more than what he actually can, emotionally can. And like sometimes we treat our young people, our teenagers, probably a little bit the same. Like you said, they look like they're adults, but they're probably not emotionally there. They're not. They're not 100% there yet, and we still need to keep showing up for them during that time.
Exactly.
So, Vanessa, thank you so much for all your time today. I just do have one final question for you before we go. Now, I've started asking our guests that are parents a question, and so I'm really grateful I got the opportunity to do that today because yourself, as a parent to 2 boys, we all want to do better for our next generation or, for our kids. Is there one thing in particular that perhaps you struggled with in your parenting journey that perhaps maybe you still struggle with, or perhaps maybe it was a challenge that you've overcome now, and maybe you can give some insight into that specific thing to our listeners and some useful tips on how to approach it?
I love this question, and my answer is big, and then I'll bring it more focused for you. I think as a mom, and maybe even little remnants of that still rippling through now, though I've done a lot of work on this thought over time, I cared way too much about what other people thought. I cared way too much about what my kid's doctor had to say. In terms of whether he's sleeping or not sleeping or whatever, I cared way too much about what the classroom teacher had to say. I cared way too much about what the nosy neighbor across the street had to say. I cared way too much about what my mother-in-law had to say. I was constantly crowdsourcing, especially when my boys were very, very little, to know that I was on the right track, that I was doing the right thing, that I was making the right choices, that I was, approaching sleep the right way, approaching discipline the right way, approaching, should my kid start school yet? Or should I hold him back a year? Should he be doing soccer and chess and art class and music class? Or should we tone it down a little bit? Should he be allowed on screens? Should he not be allowed on screens? Like all of these choices. And I would crowdsource for answers as though I don't actually know inherently what is good for my child. What I figured out over time is that was a long-standing program. I grew up as a people pleaser and an overachiever. My job was to crush it all and be really amazing. And what I realized is I actually know. I have a gut feeling about things. And it's helpful, like I read most of the parenting books that come out onto the market each year. I like to sort of be aware of what people are talking about and what's on the minds of parents and, all those kinds of things. So it's not that you like stick your head in the sand and don't do your homework. And it is that when it comes down to making decisions for yourself and your child and your family, there's nobody who's an expert on your kid the way that you are an expert on your kid. So don't outsource. Don't give your power away to all these other people. Take that power back and understand that we have been child raising for a good long time. We actually are born to this rule. And in fact, our job is to make the noise of the world be quiet so that we can hear internally what the truth of ourself, our true self, what our truth is, and that we can bring that to bear in our lives and the lives of our children. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the lady behind you in the grocery store lineup thinks about your kid having the colossal tantrum in front of everyone. It doesn't matter what the classroom teacher thinks that your kid is willfully defiant and lazy and not trying. And there's lots of beautiful classroom teachers, so don't let me into that. But I'm just saying, we don't take our cues from those sources. We take our cues from here because we are the expert on our children. I will welcome, if I ask you, you are welcome to offer me an opinion or a thought, and then I'll decide. And that's the way that it should play out. We don't crowdsource. We don't figure it out. We figure it in.
That's really wonderful. I think as well, you said about, shutting the outside noise out. And I think that noise from the rest of the world right now is getting louder and louder and louder. And it can be, as a parent especially, it can get hard to block that noise out. But just so really practical but really sometimes hard, but I think really beautiful as well. A really great advice there. So Vanessa, thank you so much for all of your insight today on boundaries, how to set them, and how to build connection if it's getting lost, and giving some really practical tips to our parent audience. And I just, really want to thank you for your time. I've really looked forward to this interview for quite a while now. So I'm really grateful that we got the opportunity to chat, and we wish you all the very best for the rest of your year, whatever that holds for you. And yes, it's fantastic to be connecting with wonderful individuals like yourself, and you're doing some amazing work in this space, and we hope that continues from here on out. So thank you very much.
So lovely. Thank you so much for having me on. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you very much. Well, that's it for today's episode of Uncharted Parenting. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. We love to hear from all of our listeners, so if you have any questions that you would like us to answer here on the podcast, we want to hear from you. Send those questions in to us and we will be answering them right here on the pod. Please send them in to podcast@encounteryouth.com.au. That's podcast@encounteryouth.com.au. Uncharted Parenting is now also on YouTube, so head on over and subscribe to our channel at Encounter Youth AU. And remember, wherever you listen to your podcasts, give us a follow, subscribe, send us a review, send in those questions by the bucket load, and remember, there's no map for parenting. You enter uncharted waters every single day, but there is a way forward. You're doing an amazing job, and we're here with you on that journey. We have some more amazing episodes and guests coming your way soon. Until next time, goodbye for now.